So far today that I have lost. The cords to my coffee pots, which makes them pretty much useless. Fortunately, there was a caterer here yesterday and they left theirs. The other thing, which I seem to have lost, is our bio for our speaker today, John Heider. I can tell you this, he has over 30 years experience working on cemeteries. He has spoken for over 10 that I know of. He is a delightful man to ride around in his truck with, and he's very funny. So I'm not really going to do a whole lot more introduction. I'm going to just turn it over to John.
Thank this group for inviting me. Mind my manners right off the bat, so I have done it. Is that on tape? I'll make sure that's there. Over the years, I've learned that to put things on tape or photographs to protect my backside, because some of the stories that I would tell were really far out, but if I have a photograph to prove it, then people usually go along with it. Anyhow, again, Paul said my name is John Heider. I've been in the restoration business for a long time. It actually started with my father-in-law. 35, 40 years ago, we restored rare antique farm machinery. And for 25 years we did that, and then a couple years we decided to, well, I guess I decided to sell everything out. I was done with it, and I wanted to stick this with restoring cemeteries. And that's what I've been doing for the last, steadily now, for the last 12, 13 years now, I guess. I travel all over the Midwest. In fact, I just got a call just last week from Boulder, Colorado. Now, I don't know if I want to go that far because that's a long drive. It really is. When I restore cemeteries or restore a gravestone, I take everything with me, and I have a truck and a trailer, and it's self-contained all the way down to a potty. It has a little tent that goes around it, so in privacy, but we try to accommodate everybody. Now, I've been a school teacher. I was a school teacher for 30 years, and for 11 years I taught the special child, and then for the remainder of the time I taught the high school kids. And to be very honest with you, I'd rather take the special child any day. Yeah. And this is a very informal, by the way, presentation. If you have any questions, ask them right away. Because I've noticed with myself, as years go along, I begin to forget quite quickly what I was going to ask. In fact, I was going to ask Paul one, and I can't remember. So I sit down and just try to think, what was I going to ask that man? But Paul asked me to develop a program that would be sort of entertaining, you might say, or give you an overview of what we do in the cemetery. I also teach this in colleges, and I travel to groups like this, and I give seminars, workshops. I talk to individuals on how to preserve their cemetery or a gravestone. In fact, on the way here, I stopped at 2 places to sort of advise the person, what they could do. And so I am very open to receiving questions. I may not have the answer right away, but I can either find it or tell you where to look for it. I may also start right off the bat, I'm not an attorney, and so as far as Kentucky laws go, I'm not up on that. But they are long, lengthy, detailed, and I think sometimes even an attorney will not give you a definite answer on how to interpret a law. So I can't help you there. But as far as the grave marker itself, I think I can give you some insight on how to preserve a gravestone or a cemetery. Let's see if I do this right. In the very beginning, there was an ending. I think that's true of anything. This particular scene right here was very typical of Kentucky or many places 150 years ago. We moved from the East Coast westward, and we settled in Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, this type of thing. And this is what we found. We found usually timbered area because that was the valuable land, because it had wood, it had animals for food, and it usually had water too. So that's where we found the first settlers, was along the rivers or the streams. And like most places, we were rather remote and scattered. And so if there was a burial, it was either on the farm or on the piece of property that we owned. And And in time, maybe that family moved on, but the burial remained. And so you might have only 2 or 3 or 1 or 2, or you may have 20 of a small community, and the community is now gone. And you might find pictures like this of cemeteries that have been forgotten. This is a picture of a cemetery that actually has about 200 grave markers in it. We spent several days cutting out trees. I think we cut about 150 or 170 trees out of it before we could even start on it. And it was rather revealing. Later on in the talk, I'll show you what it revealed to us. There's also a cemetery there. It's not unusual to see a cemetery that's partially covered up with grass or briars or small trees, this type of thing. And there are reasons for that. Maybe the land was sold, or maybe a road came through and cut it off, or someone started a farm around it and it became isolated. But there were reasons why it began to look like this. And often in these cemeteries you will find very important figures. This is a military figure. This is a revolutionary soldier. And these are daylilies, a common planting that you will find in a cemetery. He's simply being drowned by these daylilies. They just spread over the years. Now when I planted them 75 years ago, there was just one little clump. But in 75 years they expanded, and they began to cause problems with a gravestone. By the way, military markers are one of my primary goals when I go into a cemetery. If I'm at or near a grave marker, a military grave marker that's tilting, I will straighten it up free of charge. I just feel like I owe it to them, that's all. This happens to be a father and a mother who had a son, and he was a Civil War soldier when he died at Bird's Point, Missouri. He was I think he was 21 years old. Well, he had a young wife and a child. Now, this particular picture right here, at first I didn't know what it meant when I was working at a cemetery, but after a while I began to realize that these grave markers tell you a story. Now, if you look in the center, there is a granite marker. On each side, there are marble markers. On the right-hand side is the child's marker. You can't see it very well, but it's there. So that told me the story that there was this wife and a child, and someone later, probably a relative, came in and put in a granite marker. And so that meant 2 people knew that they were buried there and paid their respects to it. There are actually 45 gravestones in this cemetery. If I'm in the way, just wave your hands, get out of the way. If I can find one grave marker, I can find the rest of them in that cemetery. And I'll tell you why. Grave markers usually go north and south. The graves itself go up east and west. So if I can find one, I can find the rest of them to show you. Right there's a gravestone. And if I can find that one, I can find the rest. We did clear out all the brush, all the briars and the brambles. And if you look real close, you can see little orange flags. We go along and we find the grave sites where we think there is one, and we simply mark it. That's what it looked like when we finished. I want to draw attention to this group right here. This sort of is a neat story. Whoops. This, even though this is a line of graves, I found out that the little tiny ones were children, and that the taller one was an adult. So if there's an adult in a line of children all in a row, I think something happened during a period of time. Cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, I just don't know. Something killed a lot of people, and so they buried them all in the same row, and there was one adult in that group. If I talk too fast, tell me to slow down. Sometimes I get excited about this subject. So, this was a cemetery in the middle of a farmer's field. This cemetery was actually my first one that I did, and I have to confess something. That the young lady that approached me, she knew that I restored farm machinery, and she said, "John, I'm going to restore a cemetery. Would you like to see it?" "Yes." "No. John, I'm going to restore a cemetery. Would you like to see it?" She had a deep Southern accent, and she was good looking, and I was dead in the water. I'll tell you that right now. Well, she took me out there, and she showed me it, and I knew she couldn't do it by herself, but I turned around, and she was gone. 3 months later, I finished the cemetery. Yeah. She's smarter. And by the way, this is a hedge Osage orange archway that went into the cemetery. Lasts forever. Lasts forever. Never, but the farmer wanted to remove. Now I'm going to warn you, in part of this right here, when we restored the cemetery, we found an iron cross. And the farmer decided to put in a new archway out of cedar. Now there's going to be a loud sound pretty soon, so just be prepared. That's what the cemetery looks like today. It was quite a thing. And if you look real close, you see that? That's where we put that little metal cross right there on top. Now, in the Midwest, or just about, sometimes you have some violent storms. And one night we had an electrical storm with a lot of thunder and lightning, and bang! Lightning struck the cross. That brand new archway was gone. Nothing but cedar splinters were all over the place when I went out there. But he did put up again, another one again, so I appreciate that. I often say, and I repeat myself, these gravestones tell you a story. They talk to you. If you just take the time to sort of listen, or maybe use your imagination, they just tell you an awful lot, and I just smile when they're doing that. This is not an untypical stone at all. This is like we find them many, many times. And that's what it looks like when it was repaired. Before?
Do you have anybody to recommend?
Say again?
Do you have anybody to recommend to repair?
To do what?
Repair.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You're looking at the guy. You're looking at the guy. What I have these women that work with me, and I stay with a whip.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Actually, and folks, there's no such thing as a fairy godmother. There's no such thing as elves and little cookies and milk. You can't put it out. You got out there to do it yourself. And most people can do it. You know, this call from Boulder just blew me away. Sometimes I'm point blank. How much money do you have to spend? Whether I can, afford to come out there, whether you can afford me. And they told me. I was just amazed that they had that much money, which is fine. I'd rather have a lot than be short. But they had someone previously come out, and they were charging them an astronomical price to repair a grave marker. We don't. We'd rather see that stone repaired and put back up. But we have to be paid for our time and our materials and our travel and this type of thing. So we charge a fair price. I'd like to see these all up. I would venture a guess that Kentucky probably has 10,000 cemeteries, just because this is the way we moved. Out in some of these remote areas, you will find them everywhere. And I just shake my head as I drive by them, but there's not much I can do without some help sometimes. This happens to be a statue that was given to me. The fellow was from Maryland, I believe, and he said, "Can you fix this?" And I said, "Well, I think I can." I had never done a statue before. I always done grave markers, but I said I'd give it a try. That's what it looks like today. Before, after. And it doesn't take that long. It just takes a lot of patience. To give an example, when you glue something together, you have to wait for it to cure or dry. So you walk away from it. When you put a little bit of mortar on, you walk away. And you just do a few minutes at a time, but you can repair most of these. There's a grave marker right here. Oops, sorry. Let's see if I can. If you look on, if I can get it. I'm going to get mine. This stone is laying on the ground. It's split right here. Rarely do we see a stone that's split vertically. Most of them are horizontal. They're broken off for us. And this was just sort of unusual, but we just take it in stride. We found the base for it, and we're working on leveling the base. This young man when I took this picture, he was in the military, and he was in Kosovo, Korea, and one other place that was sort of nasty. Afghanistan, I guess it was. He was nasty. And he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Sure." And do you know what a farmer's jack in it has a lever on it? Well, he wasn't real careful, and it came up and hit him in the head and knocked him out in the cemetery. I thought, golly, he's been in all these nasty places, and I've killed him right in the cemetery, you know. But he still has a scar in his head, yeah, where it happened. Good worker. If you look real close, you can see the vertical, and that's what it looked when it was finished. And I have no special talents, but I have a lot of scars on my back from experience. A lot of them. Often we find a piece that we don't know what it is. It'll be broken, and we don't have the other piece at all. So we just keep working along, and hopefully that we will score and find it someplace at some time. This is a granite marker that happens to be laying there. There's a story that goes along with it, though. That really was really neat. There's the granite marker that I told you about. That piece is over here. Now the granite is new. This is an old cemetery of 150 years old. We haven't had granite until about 1900. You know, give or take 10 years on either side of that, but in 1900 we didn't get granite. And before that there was always marble or slate or sandstone, or maybe just a rock that was, or a wooden cross that was used as a grave marker. But this is a granite marker that someone put up later in the cemetery. We got the granite one, the pillar, back up again. Oh, by the way, this is my father-in-law. He helped me for many, many years. He's now 100 years old, and he still mows for me. In fact, he's probably mowing right now, so while I'm gone. And we were talking about it earlier, he doesn't even wear glasses. And so he was getting his driver's test a couple years ago, and they thought he was cheating because he didn't have to put his glasses on and take the test. Quite a man, very opinionated. We put this marker up, and remember that piece with the little angle missing? We found it, we used a probe. We just probe the ground until we look around, and pretty soon we hear a tink. Now, wood goes thunk. Wood, like a root, goes, you know, it gives a dead sound. But stone goes tink, and when we hear tink, we yell, good deal, we found something. So right with this is a new tree. It's a hackberry. Now, trees in a cemetery are nice, but where they grow are sometimes problems. This is a new tree. Probably what happened, a bird came along, sat on top of a grave marker, and pooped. The seed went in the ground, and it had fertilizer and water and everything, and it grew right next to the grave marker. And so it could either tip them over, break them, or hide them. Yes?
You mentioned cedar. What can you tell us about why cedar trees? What can you tell us about why cedar trees appear in family cemeteries?
That was a very common tree to plant in a cemetery. It goes back to biblical times, all right? There's a religious reason there. And also they're almost self-sustaining. You know, they just don't need any care until they reach their age when they should be removed or changed. But it's a religious reason is what it is. Do you remember the tink that I said?
Yes.
This was the piece that we were missing. Over a period of time, that tree started to grow around it. And I thought, oh my golly, how are we going to get that thing out? But my father-in-law likes to work, and he started working on the roots. I mean, this is really grown around. And he took a hatchet and a hammer and just started whittling away, and pretty soon, out it came. Now we have the other part to the grave marker, but this story really gets neat. That's what it looks like when it's put together. All right? You see the granite one back? See the granite one? They're the same. Look what was on them. The granite and the marble were somewhat different. The same person, but different information. And if you notice on the granite one, there's more information on it. So they probably went to an obituary and carved that into the granite. So now we have the new and the old together. You can't quite see it at the bottom. It's a little off down there, but that was sort of, yes.
If you have located an ancestor's grave marker in a cemetery and it dates back 200 years, can you go in and fix it, or do you have to get permission to go in and fix it?
It's always good to get permission regardless, all right? Just let everybody know what you're doing. But if it's your relatives, you have every legal right to do it.
Even if it's a great, 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 great,
If it's a relative.
Okay.
If your name is Jones and it's a Smith, I would question that. All right? Yeah.
What about cutting down the trees? Do you have to get permission for that?
The trees are not your property, all right? They're the property of the cemetery. And trees have a place in the cemetery. That's part of the fabric, yes. It may be an oak, maybe a cedar, or maybe something else. I don't know. I just don't like to get into the tree part of it because just because I don't like a tree doesn't mean I can cut it down. It may belong to some other family that planted it there 100 years ago. So trees are just, it's a questionable item. And sometimes trees affect a grave marker. They'll plant them right next to it. I had a lady, bless her heart, she put a cedar tree right on top of her great aunt's, right on top of the grave site. Just a little cedar tree. And I said, Mabel, do you know 75 years or 100 years from now what that's going to be like? She said, but John, it looks so cute right now. Think, what's it going to be like a long way down the line? And that goes for flowers, daylilies, peonies, Moliflora rose. People did that too back, 50 years ago. Often we find pieces in a cemetery, we have no idea where they went. We found those two bottom pieces, they're about the size of your palm. And we were afraid they would get lost, and so we took them back to the shop. While we were restoring the cemetery, we ran into all the pieces to this one particular grave marker, but that one little corner right there. Couldn't find it. My father-in-law looked at me and he said, John, he says, I think we have that piece back at the shop. There it was right there. We made the whole grave marker, all right? That's what it looked like when it was finished. Almost like original again. That's what I like about it. I'm going to back up a minute. Like I said, they tell you stories. These pieces were probably buried. In fact, I'm sure they were buried, so they were in Mother Earth. The earth protects them from our environment. That top piece was out in the weather. Do you see the difference in them? It was just simply eroded away. So like I said again, stones talk to you. They tell you the story. This is pretty typical. You see that in cemeteries all the time, but this one right here we're going to talk about right now. It doesn't look like much, but when you start investigating, I refer to restoring a grave marker like remodeling your house. You never know what you're going to find or going to get into. It's always a surprise every time. We tried to dig the base up. It wouldn't even come out of the ground, no matter what we did to it, physically. So I decided to get my chain hoist out. It's a 2-ton chain hoist, wrapped it around that, and I had that chain so tight on there that I could have played any song on the chain. I really could. It was that tight. I decided I'd take one more chance, and I'm going to give it just a little tweak. And just as I did this, that shot up out of the ground. I mean, it, boom, just came right out of the ground. That's a piece of concrete that someone at an earlier date put on top of part of the gravestone. They dug a hole, dropped that down in it, poured concrete, and then put the stone in on top. And over a period of time, it broke. But we did find it, we brought it out, and we were able to remove this bottom piece. We got her out of there. That's what it looks like today. There's that piece we got underneath the concrete, there's a new piece we made, and there's the rest of the grave marker. Granite, marble. Both these stones were buried. All we had was the granite one to go by. That's all. When we dug these up, they're actually reversed. This one belongs over here. This one belongs over here. The man, it was a man that did it. It was a relative. He fixed up this cemetery the best he could from his memory. He just simply had the names reversed is what he did. The information was still there, but it was just reversed. But now you can see the rest of the story. And the same thing here. The granite markers in the middle, these are sisters. The dates are reversed. The dates are reversed. The information is still there, but it's just a little obscure, that's all. The granite marker, and then when we dug it up right next to it, that's what was underneath it. Maybelle and Mabel, I think that's how you would say it. And the little child was known as Maudie. That's what they would call a little child, Maudie. But her name was really Maud. And it doesn't give any dates on it at all, but it does here. So somebody had that information they later put on the granite marker. You have the before and the after. Aha, aha. There you see your cedar trees right down through the center. These are mature cedar trees. They are probably they are probably 125 years old. They're probably reaching the end of their life too. And sooner or later that cemetery is going to have to address what are we going to do with these trees. Or maybe the weather will make a decision for them. I don't know, it just depends. But trees belong in a cemetery, yes, but trees are a problem where they are sometimes. There's a good example right there. And this is not an uncommon sight either. I have some other photographs in the program this afternoon that I think that go along with this. But you can see where the new tree right here was affecting the grave marker. It was simply just starting to push it over. And maybe in time it may grab it enough that you couldn't even get it out. You couldn't even move it out. But we did. We got her out there. But right here it's completely, in another 15, 20 years, that stone will disappear. Oh, this is the one that I like. If you notice, that's a cast iron fence. This is an oak tree. And the oak tree simply grew around the whole cast iron fence. Now also, at some time, somebody tried to kill it. They made a chainsaw mark all around it. And it didn't work, the tree still lived. Now the story goes, the legend goes about this particular gravesite, that there's a witch buried there, a witch. And she will have a tree grow upon her gravesite. Did it? I don't know. It's a good story to tell kids, though. But often we have private areas in a cemetery that might have a cast iron fence around it. And in those private areas, trees may grow on its own. The people no longer live in the area, and either the undergrowth takes over or the tree does or something like that, and it just simply covers up the family plot. If you can nip that tree in the bud, when it's just a little tiny one, that's the time to do it. Don't wait until mañana. That doesn't work. This is not an uncommon sight to see in a cemetery where the military marker has been in there for 50 years or more, and it's beginning to lean. We just simply go over and straighten them up as a surface to that person. That's all. Takes about 5 or 10 minutes to straighten up a military marker. They're one of the easiest ones to do. In fact, when I teach classes, I look for military markers in a cemetery for people to practice on because they are very forgiving.
How many inches below the surface?
It depends on the length of it. This is something else that I enjoy. There are government regulations that look like a Sears and Roebuck catalog on how to put a grave marker in. I condense it down to 1 page. Yeah, this is the way you do it. Yeah, and there are some grave marker installers that put them in concrete. That's a no-no. Concrete is evil. That's what we refer to it. In fact, I was giving it to a group like this in Ohio. And I said, what is concrete? And this little tiny voice clear in the back says, it's evil. That's what she said. She was right. Concrete causes problems. In fact, during the 1930s, during the Depression, our government had this great idea of going into cemeteries and making them look respectable. So they would hire a lot of men to go in and straighten up the grave markers, and they put concrete down. They use this. And if you look at those grave markers today, many of them are broken off right at the concrete. That's where they'll break. So even though our government put a lot of people together and they had good intentions, in the end, or today, that wasn't a good idea. And so we tried to set the grave markers exactly like they did 150 years ago. And I'm going to give you an example of that. If you have a large monument, big, weighs thousands of pounds, more than likely there's bricks underneath there. If you were to take it apart, there'll be bricks underneath there. Why do we have to pour concrete again? Put bricks back. It lasts another 150 years. So we try to put back exactly the same thing again. We don't ever pour a marker in concrete. Never. If we have a base that's broken, we might make a new concrete base for it, but we set it in a soft mortar that will break before the stone does. A GAR emblem. What does GAR mean? I've forgotten. Very good. Grand Army of the Republic. Where did it start? Where? Right after the Civil War. Right after the Civil War. Where? Decatur, Illinois. You know, that's 20 miles from my home. And I don't mean this disrespectful, big deal. So everything has to start someplace, right? It was in Decatur. But the plot thickens a little bit. And this is what I enjoy. When I look at a grave marker, it becomes very personal to me. I want to know something about that person. You know, why, when, and wherefore, this type of thing. And so I got a GAR emblem, and it tells me that that person, that was a piece we found, we welded it on, made it a little bit bigger. That person belonged to the GAR back then. Right after the Civil War, he was a member. So now I have a grave marker and I have a GAR member. I put them together. That tells me the story about that person a little bit. James is buried here. James, and that's his wife Martha. But James, a brother to Benjamin. Okay, who wants to tell me the story of James and Benjamin? Benjamin was the founder of the GAR in Decatur, Dr. Benjamin Stevenson. And I'll bet you $1 to a donut that James was involved there too. And these people have no idea how famous this stone is sitting in their cemetery. And the GAR our American Legion was the GAR back then. It evolved over the years to the American Legion. Now, people say, well, prove it to me. There it is right there. I did some sleuthing, and I found out that James and Benjamin were brothers. James is buried in Illinois. Well, both of them buried in Illinois, and one is buried about 50 miles from the other. But that made a connection to me that these people, this county, has someone famous. Like you might have a famous general in one of your cemeteries. You know, that's not uncommon. The Civil War, or maybe even later. That's history. Boy, that's something that just not everybody has. There's Benjamin, he founded it. And there's James's brother right there. An engraver's talent. How many, 5? Yeah. 5 different fonts on this grave marker. It's made out of marble. Don't laugh, because the grave marker, the grave carver charged you every time he changed the font. So your price went up on that baby. If you'd had all the same lettering all the way through, it'd been one price. Because you wanted it changed, he upped the price. He or she. Most of them were men back then. People buy a real expensive marble or granite marker, and then they put an inexpensive limestone, which is going to melt, break, or crack or something in time, and something will happen. So we just simply removed it, lowered the center of gravity, and put it on a concrete slab. It's a lot safer. The history is still there.
You know, on that red brown stuff,
Okay, to what?
on that red brown stuff on there,
Yes, yeah,
I tried to clean it.
yeah,
I used still water,
Uh-huh.
D2.
uh-huh.
Is that a good procedure?
Yeah, we have, I'm not selling, all right? You just do what you're darn well pleased, because I've heard wire brushes, files, putty knives, bleach, you know, Wesley's bleach white. I can name 100 different things that people use to clean a stone, but most of them, 99% of them are going to harm it. It'll get it clean right now, right to see it right away, but in 5 years, 10 years, it'll begin to look ugly. It'll change it. So we recommend either D2 or Keystone. They're the same, very similar to each other. Different in prices, but very, very good. And they're a chemical. But you, go ahead.
I didn't want to speak, but just a minute. I'm in charge of this DAR cemetery lot in Kentucky, where we have our revolutionary ancestors buried. And I didn't want to do anything that was, you know, incorrect. And I'd appreciate any advice that you could give me, because I want it maintained correctly.
That's
I'm
about it.
fascinated by everything you say.
That's about the best way you can put it. I want to do it right. And we try to tell you how to do it right. To give an example, cleaning stone, the least expensive we have an order is plain water. Okay? And then you can use ammonia in water. That's unscented. And then you can use a non-ionic cleaner, Orvis. You can buy that in a farm store, or you can use a chemical cleaner like we have over here. We use a chemical cleaner because we want it done right. We want it to last a long time, 3 to 5 years, or it depends what kind of environment the stone is in. It'll last longer with the chemical treatment. But don't go, well, I don't know if it's here, but let's get on. We'll talk about cleaning later on, okay? If you don't mind. These are just some of the changes we make in a cemetery. Same thing. And like I said, it's like a treasure hunt. You just never know what you're going to find or see, this type of thing. How many have ever seen pictures like this? Huh? Very common. Pile up against a building, against a tree, or maybe just out in the open. Very common. Sometimes we can match them up. Sometimes we can't. And when we can't, we make a memorial area that these people we know are buried there, and we put them in an area where there are no burials at all, and people can still come and pay respects or genealogy or whatever they want to do to see it. It's still there. They're not in a pile anymore. These young people are our salvation. If they don't get interested in our history, our outdoor history, you know, we'll lose that part too. So I try to involve young people all the time. I put them to work. I pay them. I take pictures of them. I build them up. And they are my mountains. They've got energy to burn. I mean, they dig like gophers, and they will scrub like mad. And it's just, I'm also very tricky. This was a bunch of young kids. I don't know who. Some lady in here was talking about how she worked with the incorrigible kid. This happened to be a group of girls that I was working with. They were just one step away from the big house. But I was very much impressed with them because they sang while they worked, while they were cleaning up the cemetery. It was just so neat to watch it and listen to it. Young kid right there. That's a battery-powered drill. He's allowed to clean the edge, that's all. And so I allow him to do this. It's not a 110, it's not electrical powered, but it's battery powered, goes very, very slow, and he just loved it. He just cleaned all the stones all day long like that. Became an expert at it. These are these are brothers and a father having me there. The one in the middle came to the cemetery where we're working. You know what these little things, you see them walk around with these things all? They don't have any idea what's out here, not at all. Just, I took it away from him, put it down. Good man. Of course, I do that often. Even my kids, when they come in the house, aren't allowed to wear the hat. You know, they get scowls. But anyhow, he growled at me, but at the end of the day, he was working with everybody else. His brother, who was an MIT student, really brainy, came, and here's his younger brother telling his older brother how to put together stones. That's a chain hoist, and if you know anything about a chain hoist, it works on a series of pulleys, and you can lift large amounts. So these little kids can lift 100 pounds without blinking an eye, and they think they're great. Of course, you got to feel their muscles afterwards just to sort of build them up. And this is something else. You get these young kids interested in these cemeteries, which we did 100 years ago. We had picnics in there. You know, we had family gatherings. We went there every Sunday. We talked about, who had passed and this type of thing. And we don't do that today, but that's what we did. But if you can get these kids interested in it and telling stories about it, they will be doing what I'm doing right now, hopefully. This young man is probably 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. This is up in near Chicago. It's called Fermi Labs. It's a government complex of about 3,500 acres. I just happened to read one day that they were going to restore the cemetery on their property, and they were going to use a backhoe. Whoa. I said, I'll come up and help you for free. And I spent 2 days with them, and this little guy right here followed me around just like a little shadow. So finally I got not sick of him, but I thought, well, all right, I'm going to try. I said, if you know so much about this, you teach the class. And so he's down there telling them how to glue these stones together. Of course, I'm back taking a picture. I'm just watching the whole thing. It's sort of neat. Yeah, he's telling them how to do it. But sometimes my teaching goes awry that I don't always anticipate. Do you see what he's doing there? We were all done with that cemetery, and he found one more. All packed up, ready to go, and he found one more. Well, I didn't have anything to do with restoring the last one because I was ready to go home. But they did go back and they put the stone together later on. But he's using these wires. We can find an unmarked grave by using these wires. Now, I have no special powers, and this is nothing fantastic about it. 95% of the people can do it, just got to practice at it. And like I said, I try to make these classes enjoyable. Besides finding the grave, we can also tell you the gender who's buried there. And so I taught these little kids, that you don't see them right now, but they're in the background, and they're walking around the cemetery, and they're doing all kinds of things with these wires, just having a ball. Until I caught them off in a corner around these bricks, and they had this little brick complex. And so as a teacher, I just sort of walked over there. What are you guys doing? He says, well, we got some bugs here. What are you doing with the bugs? Oh, we're just trying to tell the boys from the girls. Whatever makes them happy, you know. These are some of the tools that we use on in a workshop. This is just an example. We come pretty well equipped when we teach the classes. We limit them. When we have a physical workshop, we only say 6 or 8 people. That's all we'll take, because we cannot teach very well any more than that. This is the workshop. We teach you how to lift a stone properly, easily. I've seen people grab this stone, more than one, grab this stone and fight it to pull it up. We just said, put the clamps out and lift it up, get it out of here. This takes a couple of minutes, so much easier. These girls are probably lifting 4,000 pounds. Yeah. And these two young ladies, I just let them go off by themselves. They just work right along now, straighten up these grave markers. They know how to do it. There's good and there's bad repairs. I've seen a lot of bad ones, and I've seen fewer good ones. Oh, by the way, I think that's the one. But anyway, okay. We're rebuilding a pillar going up. Do you notice anything about that photograph? That lady's blind. She's blind, and she's participating in restoring that grave marker. Her touch was fantastic. It was like eyes. I had a young man came in a wheelchair, and what I do with a wheelchair, we wheel him around, but we found out that he could hold the boards real well. We put the boards across his arms of his wheelchair, and he'd wrap around them and just hang on. Well, we sawed them and did whatever we had to do with them. He was part of the workshop too. Well, that's one way to save money. However, a fellow from Ohio called me. He says, "John, you have to come out here." They tore down the school, and right above the entrance to the school was this marble sign that said, "Pittsfield Special School District number something or other." And it gave 1878 in marble. When they took it off, that grave marker was on the other side. Someone either didn't pay for it, it was done wrong, the carver did not want to throw it away, so he recarved the school district on the other side and put it up. Probably was up there for 100 years. So they are reused. Often we see grave markers reused, in various situations. Or we see grave markers that have had practice carving on them. The carver would practice on them before he actually did the real work. I want you to tell me the story of Moses Gibson. Like I said, these stones talk to you. They tell you the story. I'd prefer not to have any sly remarks, all right? Moses Gibson was married to two women who were sisters at the same time. Tell me the story of Moses Gibson. He was a old-time practicing Mormon. Yep. This is probably my favorite rock. We often see rocks in cemeteries because that's how we mark the grave. We didn't have the money, or there wasn't a carver nearby. And so we put a stone down. And over the years, our families would come and they'd say, well, this is where my aunt or my uncle or my mom is buried. They would know that stone. But because of time, that story was forgotten. However, this rock is very special to me. There was a crossroads with a building on one corner and two families across the road from each other. And the children were not allowed to talk to each other. I don't know what the problem was between the families, have no idea at all. But the boy and the girl, they would communicate with each other. They'd slip notes underneath of this rock all the time. And later on, they married. And when they passed, their children took the rock and placed it on their gravesite. That's probably my favorite rock. This is a large boulder. It's in a cemetery. It tells the story of this young lady all the way around. If you just want to walk around, you begin to know her personality from the get-go. She likes lemon meringue pie. And she punched a guy in the eye. That's even on there. And if you look real close, ornery is misspelled. It tells me about the people. It really does. It's fun. And I'm not doing this in disrespect, but I'm learning about you. This happens to be an Indian burial. I was not allowed to work in it, but I worked right next to her. I feel very fortunate to be able to take pictures of it. But this is the burial of Geronimo. And his family is buried in this cemetery. This is on Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma. Fort Sill. I was just getting ready to leave this cemetery. It was overcast like it was yesterday here. Very little sun at all, gray. In fact, if you look in the background, it's just gray. And just as we're driving out of the cemetery, this spotlight came through the clouds on this child's grave. A ray of sunlight. I mean, you could just see the beam. And I thought, that's a message. So I jumped out and took a picture of it right away. I only had a few seconds, but I got a picture of that. I thought, that's unusual too. The name is Shelton. Sudie and Frank, they're buried there. This is their grave marker. It was done by hand. I'm guessing with a nail and a hammer, all right? And probably one of their children pecked it out. So they, okay, what is the grave marker now? It's a toilet lid top. No. Inexpensive, will probably last forever, right? But it's a toilet lid top is what it is. This happens to be a concrete one. The word unknown has always bothered me because it's known to someone, okay? It's known to someone. But at least they had the time to make the concrete marker and said someone is buried here. What do you think? This is a what? What is that? It's an anvil. Who was this person? Probably a blacksmith, worked with metal, right? What's this right here?
Water pump.
It's a tie rod off of a car. What do you think that person was? Probably a mechanic or liked automobiles, liked to build things. Now, I never have figured this one out, right here. This is a stump, a wooden stump, and the grave marker's in the center of it. I don't know how it happened, but there it was. I took a picture of it anyhow. I don't know the story of that one, but it is unusual.
Oh, wow.
A couple of school teachers. Let's go down here. Cinderella Ray. She was born in 1833, way before Walt Disney brought the story out about Cinderella. I always thought Walt did it. I always thought he made the word up. Oh, Cinderella Ray had it way before Walt was even born.
I've got a Cinderella.
All right. Like I said, these stones, they have a personality, they have a family, they have history to it. This is made out of concrete. It's a concrete grave marker made by a family member probably, and it tells somebody was born April 17th, 1918. If you notice, one of the letters is backwards. Okay? Fine. And the letters are much larger. Let's go to the right side now. It tells you about the death date. They're much smaller, aren't they? Much smaller. So it was almost like an afterthought. We had the day when she was born, and now we have the date that they passed. Okay, that's fine. And that is infant. It's an infant, so it's a child buried there. That's what it's telling me. And it's William A. Carter. That's his name. Son of, there's the back, Mrs. Caleb, I think her last name was Hodge. His name was Carter. Her name was Hodge. You make up your own story on that one then, okay? Now let's take a look at the center. What's that circle for? Come on, swag it. Take a guess.
You have something sticking up, something attached, you have eight.
When the concrete was still wet, they decided to put a glass mason's jar in there. And as time passed, they put flowers in it. But over a period of years, the jar got broken, and just the glass remains in the concrete. That's all. The one on the left is one of my favorites too. Would you hire this guy to do your grave marker? When I dig up a stone, I never know what I'm going to find on there, and I may find practically anything. And it's not unusual to find a liquor bottle that was put in there, so it's very common. So I would guess that this fella wasn't completely sober, but he had the nerve to put his name at the bottom of it.
Still proud of it.
Well, who carved it? I never have figured out when this one passed. I was 56 or 57. One of the two. This one's just that I worked in a cemetery in Wisconsin. This is the grave site of Frank Lloyd Wright. Who was he? Yeah, a well-known one, right? Well-known architect. But you know something? Frank ain't buried there. He's buried in California. That's called a cenotaph. It's a marker, commemorating that he lived in this area, but the locals don't tell you that Frank's not buried there. And they'll have hundreds of people come to the town to see his house and to visit his gravesite. And they'll take pictures and think that Frank is there. No, Frank's in California, but the locals don't tell you that.
Cenotaph?
Cenotaph. That's a memorial, all right? Memorial. And it's not unusual to see these in cemeteries where you may have been raised in California, a certain town, but you live here in Kentucky, and you want some kind of a marker for you back in California with a family, that type of thing.
How do you spell that?
C-E-N-T, I think there's a PH in there, I think, too, cenotaph. I like this one because I often wondered what this lady was thinking with that little tab sticking out of her hat. What's really on her mind? What's she thinking about? This is probably our most favorite grave marker. This is a grave marker of Lulu. When we started out, that's all we could see. That's all we could see. When we started to dig, we found these parts, and we had no idea what they were doing, what they meant, how they were to go together. And so my father-in-law, in all due diligence, he's putting these pieces of puzzle together, and finally he hollers, "I got it." That's what she looked like. That's when we finished it. The center part is for flowers. And I'll bet you $1 to a donut that if I went out there today, there's flowers in the center of her grave right now. It's out in the country, in the woods, and flowers appear in that spot every year. I just smile and walk away. That someone hasn't forgotten her. Lulu was 5 years old when she died of consumption. 1850, somewhere right around in there. Consumption meant she couldn't breathe. That was a general term. She could have had a lot of problems. But she was only 5 years old when she passed away. Her folks spent probably their life savings on that grave marker, probably $25 back then. And that was a lot of money to spend on a grave marker. They bought her this beautiful bedstead, it's called, a bedstead grave marker. Like I said, she's 5, and probably spent $25. And in my research, I got a hold of a Sears and Roebuck catalog, 1915. In it, Sears sold everything from tractors to houses to shoes, everything. And they also sold grave markers. I looked it up. They had that bedstead in there for $23.50. That's what you paid for that grave marker. If you liked it, you simply wrote on a piece of paper what you wanted on it, paid $1 down. Sears would send it off, have it made, and would come back on REA, the railroad, because we didn't have trucks and stuff back. It came back by the railroad. You went down to the local depot, the local agency, you took a look at that grade marker. If you liked it, you paid the balance. If you didn't like it, send it back, and Sears gave you your dollar back. That's one heck of a guarantee, isn't it? Yeah. We are stewards of history. There's no doubt about that. You can have your cemetery look like this, or they can look like that. You know, it's up to you. You know, it says, well, I don't know how to do it. That's the reason I'm here. That's the reason I give you my name, my address, my phone number. My wife says, boy, you've got a lot of women on your phone, don't you? And I said, well, yes, I do. I said, that's usually to talk to. But anyhow, I am available to answer questions, to inquiries. I'm also available to do work, you know, if you want me to, but it's up to you. And thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.